Action City was a neural network's fever dream, if that neural network was on a bender with a penchant for surveillance. The skyline was a jagged row of steel teeth, gnawing at the sky, while below, the streets wound like a snake that had forgotten how to slither. Overhead, the Valtari's drones hummed, ever-watchful angels of a hellish machine heaven. Their only job, to remind humans they were about as free as a goldfish in a blender. Brevin lounged against a rusting bulkhead, his eyes flickering over the bustling market square below. "Look at him, Todd," he said, jerking his chin toward a group of humans bartering over a crate of questionable vegetables, scrambling around like ants in an anthill that's on fire. Todd, a wiry man with a smile that could cut glass, laughed. "Yeah, but at least those ants don't have a giant bug god watching their every move. Makes you wonder, doesn't it? Wonder. I gave up wondering when those blue-skinned bastards landed," Brevin replied, scratching at the implant behind his ear. The Valtari had gifted it to him, though gifted was doing a lot of heavy lifting in a bid for better cooperation. Most days it felt more like a leash with a built-in electric shock. "Still," Brevin continued, "I can't shake this feeling like something's off. Saw a drone crash into a billboard yesterday. Valtari don't make mistakes, like ever." Todd shrugged, tossing a pebble over the edge. "Maybe they finally ran out of juice, or maybe they're just as fed up with us as we are with them." Brevin chuckled darkly. Who could blame him? After all, we're charming little shits, aren't we? The air was thick with the smell of burning synth meat and a cacophony of haggling voices. Brevin's eyes caught on a familiar figure weaving through the crowd. "Speak of the devil," he muttered as Lena, their resident tech genius, approached with a swagger that would make a pirate blush. "Brevin, Todd," Lena greeted, her voice dripping with sweet sarcasm. "Plotting our glorious revolution or just swapping insults?" "Bit of both," Brevin replied, grinning. "What's the news from the front line of nerddom?" Lena smirked, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. "Got something juicy. The Valtari's latest update. It's got more holes than our last escape route. And I poked around a bit, found some interesting glitches. They might be slipping." Brevin raised an eyebrow. "Glitches, or one of your optimistic software predictions?" "Hey, I'm a realist," Lena retorted, crossing her arms. "I just happen to have a healthy disdain for the laws of probability. That, and I think we can use this." "Use it," Todd cut in, skeptical. "Like we could use a parachute with a hole in it." Lena rolled her eyes. "Use it, as in we might find a way to break their stranglehold. Maybe even get a peek at what they are hiding." Brevin considered this, eyes narrowing. "And how do you suggest we poke the bear without getting mauled?" "We don't," Lena replied, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "We just let the bear trip over its own feet." Todd snorted. "And if that fails, then we run like hell." "Like always," Brevin said, clapping a hand on Todd's shoulder. "But first drinks, I think better with alcohol." The trio made their way through the market, dodging carts and sidestepping dubious merchandise. The bar was a dimly lit hole in the wall where the floors were sticky, the drinks questionable, and the company even worse. "Ah, the sultry nebula," Brevin said, gesturing grandly. "Where dreams come to die and bad decisions are made permanent." "Cheers to that," Lena agreed, sliding onto a stool. "I've got a tab running here that's longer than Todd's list of excuses." "Hey, my excuses are masterpieces," Todd defended, raising his glass. "And I'm keeping them for posterity." They all clinked glasses, the burn of cheap synthetic alcohol a welcome distraction. Brevin leaned forward, eyes darting as he spoke in low tones. "All right, Lena, tell us what you've got." She pulled a small device from her pocket, a mismatched collection of wires and circuits. "Managed to tap into a Valtari data stream. It's like watching paint dry, but occasionally something interesting pops up, like last night. One of their security protocols went haywire." "Define haywire," Todd said, leaning in. "Think of it as a Valtari version of a tantrum," Lena replied, winking. "Only less smashing plates, more frying circuits." Brevin nodded slowly, turning the device over in his hands. "And you think we can exploit this?" Lena shrugged. "If we can't, we deserve to be under their boot. But something's up, Brev, I can feel it." "Great," Brevin said sarcastically. "Hunch from the woman who once tried to convince us that a toaster was sentient." "Hey, that toaster was plotting something," Lena shot back. But seriously, if there's a crack in their armor, I say we shove a crowbar in it." They fell into silence, considering the possibilities and the potential consequences. Action City was no place for idealists or fools, and they were dangerously close to being both. Still, the allure of freedom, however slim, was intoxicating. "All right," Brevin said finally, a hard edge to his voice. "Let's see where this rabbit hole leads. But first, another round. If we're going to piss off the most advanced species in the galaxy, we might as well be drunk while doing it." "Hear, hear," Lena and Todd chorused, raising their glasses in unison. The liquid courage burned down their throats, a fitting preamble to the storm they were about to unleash. As they left the bar, the city loomed around them, indifferent and unyielding. The neon lights flickered overhead, casting harsh shadows that seemed to watch their every move. Brevin felt the weight of the implant thrumming against his skull, a constant reminder of their chains. "You know," Todd mused as they walked, "if we do manage to pull this off, what then?" "Then we find out if we can fly without wings," Brevin replied, shrugging. "Or we crash and burn. Either way, it'll be one hell of a ride." Lena grinned, her eyes gleaming with mischief. "And I'll be there to document every glorious screw-up." "That's the spirit," Brevin said, clapping her on the back. "Now let's give those Valtari something to really watch." The trio moved with renewed purpose, each step a small act of defiance against their alien overlords. And as Brevin felt the beginnings of a plan formulating, a plan as reckless as it was desperate, he couldn't help but laugh. After all, what was life under the Valtari without a little chaos? As they rounded a corner, the air suddenly felt thicker, charged with a tension that set Brevin's nerves on edge. He paused, squinting into the shadows where a figure leaned casually against a wall. "Evening, folks," the stranger said, pushing off from the wall with an easy grace. His face was obscured by a hood, but the glint of his eyes was unmistakably human. "Heard you might be looking for a different kind of fun." Brevin exchanged a glance with Lena and Todd. "Who's asking?" The stranger chuckled, a low, knowing sound. "Let's just say I'm a connoisseur of chaos, and I've got a few tricks up my sleeve you might find useful." Lena narrowed her eyes. "What makes you think we need help?" "Please," the stranger replied, amusement coloring his words. "You're about as subtle as a sledgehammer, and besides, I have a vested interest in shaking things up." Brevin considered this, weighing the risks. The Valtari were formidable, but they weren't infallible, and if there was a chance, any chance, to exploit their weaknesses, it was now or never. "All right," Brevin said, extending a hand. "Let's see what you've got, but fair warning, if you're setting us up, we'll make sure you regret it." The stranger clasped Brevin's hand with a firm grip, a sly smile playing across his lips. "Trust me," he said. "Regret's not my style." As they walked into the night, the city seemed to hold its breath, as if sensing the stirrings of rebellion. Brevin felt the excitement bubbling up, a dangerous thrill that reminded him why they fought in the first place. And though the path ahead was fraught with peril, and the odds stacked against them, one thing was certain. Action City was about to get a whole lot more interesting. Brevin, Lena, and Todd followed the stranger through the winding maze of Action City's underbelly, the neon signs above them flickering like a bad omen or a cheap disco ball. Take your pick. The stranger, who hadn't bothered with introductions, walked with the kind of confidence that usually got people killed. Or maybe that was just Brevin's cynicism talking. They finally stopped in front of a steel door that looked like it had seen one too many bar fights. The stranger tapped a sequence into the keypad with the ease of someone who had done this 1,000 times. Brevin half expected a trapdoor to open beneath their feet, but instead, the door slid open with a grating screech, revealing a dimly lit room filled with a ragtag bunch of humans who looked like they'd been recruited straight from the wanted posters. "Welcome," the stranger said with a sweeping gesture, as if unveiling a masterpiece instead of a room that smelled faintly of ozone and despair. "This is where the magic happens." "Magic, huh?" Lena said, arching an eyebrow, more like a fire hazard waiting to happen. Brevin scanned the room, noting the flickering terminals and the people hunched over them, their faces illuminated by the glow of data streams. The air was thick with the hum of electronics and the occasional curse as someone realized their code had just imploded. "Who's in charge here?" Brevin asked, folding his arms. "That'd be me," said a woman who stepped out from behind a console. She had sharp eyes and a sharper smile, and she wore authority like a cloak. "Name's Kira, and you must be the ones thinking of poking the Valtari bear." "Something like that," Brevin replied. "Thought it might be fun to see if we could tip it over." Kira chuckled, a dark, smoky sound that promised trouble. "Well, you came to the right place. We've been working on a little plan of our own, but first, introduction." She gestured to the stranger. "This here's Finn. He specializes in getting where he's not supposed to." "Charmed," Finn said with a grin that was all mischief and no good intentions. "And the rest?" Brevin gestured around the room. Kira shrugged. "Motley crew of agitators, hackers, and freedom enthusiasts. We've got a plan to hack the Valtari's neural network, but we could use some extra hands." "Extra hands or extra scapegoats?" Todd muttered under his breath. Kira's smile widened. "Depends on how well you play your cards." Lena leaned in, eyes gleaming with curiosity. "So what's the plan? Blow up a few circuits and hope they don't notice?" "More or less," Kira said, her tone laced with sarcasm. "Actually, we've discovered that their systems are vulnerable to good old human unpredictability. All that logic and order, they never accounted for our special brand of chaos." Brevin rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "So, what? We hack their network and throw in a few curveballs." "Exactly," Kira confirmed. "Their reliance on logic is their Achilles heel. A few well-placed errors and their systems could start cannibalizing themselves." "And what if they figure it out before we make a dent?" Todd asked, ever the realist. "Then we run like hell," Kira replied, echoing Brevin's earlier sentiment. "But if we pull it off, we might just see the cracks widen." Brevin nodded slowly. "Sounds like a plan doomed to glorious failure. Count us in." "Good," Kira said, clapping her hands together. "We'll start by mapping out their neural network. Finn, you'll take Brevin and Todd to the relay stations. Lena, you're with me." As they split up, Brevin couldn't shake the feeling that they were about to play a very dangerous game of cat and mouse with an enemy that didn't know how to lose. But hell, if they were going down, it'd be one hell of a show. Finn led them through a series of tunnels that smelled like neglect and desperation, the faint echoes of their footsteps swallowed by the darkness. "So," Brevin said, trying to make small talk as they walked, "how'd you get mixed up in all this?" "Same as everyone else," Finn replied, his voice bouncing off the walls. "The Valtari showed up and started treating us like pets. I figured it was time someone bit back." "You're a regular revolutionary, aren't you?" Todd said, his tone somewhere between admiration and mockery. "It's not about revolution," Finn said, glancing back with a grin. "It's about pissing in their cornflakes." They reached the relay station, a junction of wires and panels that looked like it had been assembled by a blindfolded chimp. Finn set to work, fingers flying over a terminal, while Brevin and Todd kept watch. "So what exactly are we doing here?" Brevin asked, watching as Finn's fingers danced across the keyboard. "We're laying the groundwork," Finn said without looking up, "feeding false data into their systems, creating little inconsistencies that'll snowball into bigger problems." "Lovely," Todd said, peering over Finn's shoulder. "Tell me again why we trust you not to get us all killed." Finn chuckled. "Because I'm too pretty to die and you're too desperate to pick better allies." "Fair enough," Brevin conceded, leaning back against the wall. As the minutes ticked by, Brevin felt the weight of the implant behind his ear, a constant reminder of their captors. The thought of throwing a wrench in the Valtari's carefully oiled machine was almost enough to make him forget the risk. Almost. Meanwhile, Lena found herself in Kira's makeshift command center, a room that was equal parts chaos and ingenuity. Wires snaked across the floor, connecting terminals and monitors that hummed with activity. It was the kind of place that made Lena's tech-loving heart skip a beat. Kira tapped a screen, bringing up a schematic of the Valtari's neural network. "This is what we're up against," she said, pointing at the web of connections. "The trick is finding the right nodes to hit, throw off their whole rhythm." Lena studied the display, fingers tapping restlessly against her thigh. "So we're playing a game of Jenga with their systems." "More or less," Kira replied. "We hit the nodes that'll cause the most disruption and pray they don't catch on too fast." "Never pegged you for the praying type," Lena said with a smirk. Kira shrugged. "I'm not, but desperation's a hell of a motivator." Lena chuckled, leaning over the terminal. All right, let's see what kind of chaos we can cook up. As they worked, the tension in the room was palpable, a simmering undercurrent of anticipation and fear. They were poking at a sleeping giant, hoping it wouldn't wake up before they were ready. But if it did, at least they'd go down swinging. Hours passed in a blur of code and caffeine, the lines between success and failure blurring as they delved deeper into the Valtari systems. Lena and Kira worked in tandem, their banter punctuating the silence. "So what's your plan if this all goes south?" Lena asked, glancing up from the screen. Kira snorted. "Run like hell and hope I'm faster than the slowest guy." "Nice to see you've thought things through," Lena said dryly. "I'm a regular strategist," Kira replied with mock seriousness. Back at the relay station, Finn leaned back with a sigh, stretching his arms above his head. "Done. For now, anyway. We'll see how long it takes for them to notice." "Let's hope it's long enough for us to get a head start," Brevin said, already mentally mapping out their quickest escape routes. The trio made their way back to Kira's command center, feeling the weight of what they'd set in motion hanging over them like a storm cloud. The room was buzzing with a nervous energy, everyone aware that they were teetering on the edge of something monumental and potentially catastrophic. "How'd it go?" Kira asked as they entered. "Done and dusted," Finn replied, dropping into a chair with a satisfied grin. "Good," Kira said, turning to face the group. "Now we wait and watch for the fallout. And if nothing happens," Todd asked, always the skeptic. "Then we regroup and try again," Kira said without missing a beat. "Or we drink ourselves into oblivion and call it a day." Brevin chuckled, a dark, humorless sound. "Sounds like a plan." The hours dragged on, each tick of the clock a reminder that they were gambling with lives, theirs and everyone around them. But as the minutes turned into hours, the tension in the room ratcheted higher, anticipation coiled tight like a spring ready to snap. Then, ever so subtly, the room seemed to hold its breath. One of the monitors flickered, displaying a cascade of alerts that made Lena's heart skip a beat. "Looks like something's happening," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. All eyes turned to the screens, watching as the Valtari's network began to stutter and falter, the carefully orchestrated ballet of data turning into a chaotic mosh pit. Brevin let out a low whistle. "Well, I'll be damned. It's actually working." Kira allowed herself a triumphant smile. "Now we see if it sticks." As they watched the chaos unfold, Brevin felt a strange sense of satisfaction, like they'd finally managed to knock the smug aliens down a peg. It was a small victory, but in a world where hope was a luxury, it was enough to ignite a spark of defiance. "Let's see how they like a taste of their own medicine," Finn said, eyes gleaming with a mix of mischief and malice. But Brevin knew better than to celebrate prematurely. The Valtari were nothing if not persistent, and their retaliation would come soon enough. But for now, they'd managed to spit in the face of their captors, and that was a victory worth savoring. As they settled back to watch the spectacle, Brevin couldn't help but smile. The odds were against them, the stakes higher than ever, but in that moment with chaos blooming all around them, they were more than just pawns in someone else's game. They were the architects of their own fate, and that was a power worth fighting for. "To chaos," Brevin said, raising an imaginary glass. "To chaos," the others echoed, and for the first time in a long while, Brevin dared to hope that maybe, just maybe, they stood a chance. Brevin and Todd slouched against the walls of Kira's command center, which looked like a tech junkyard where outdated screens and wires did the tango, while Finn fiddled with a terminal, his fingers a blur of mischief. The room buzzed with nervous energy, a cocktail of adrenaline and caffeine, shaken, not stirred. Finn finally leaned back, grinning like a cat with a feather sticking out of its mouth. "So you lot want the good news or the bad news first?" "Always the bad news," Todd grumbled. "Keeps my expectations appropriately low." "Your optimism is infectious," Brevin added dryly. "Bad news, we're more noticeable than we thought," Finn said, rubbing his chin. "Good news, we've accidentally caused a glitch that's got the Valtari chasing their own tails." Brevin arched an eyebrow. "Accidentally, you say?" "Yeah, turns out their systems are even more brittle than we imagined," Finn continued, a smirk playing on his lips. Who knew being inflexible could be such a liability? Lena chimed in from across the room, her eyes glued to the flickering monitors. So we've stirred the pot, but what's stopping them from tracking us back here and squashing us like bugs? Finn waved his hand dismissively. PFFT. Too much chaos, too little time. It's like trying to catch smoke with a net. They'll be busy untangling their mess for a while. Kira was less amused, her face a study in strategic frowns. Our accidental stroke of genius might just have put us at the top of their hit list. They'll double down on surveillance. Great, Brevin muttered, as if I didn't already feel like a zoo exhibit. Look at the bright side, Lena offered, trying to lighten the mood. We've proved they're not invincible. Yeah, Todd snorted, and we've also proved we're not as clever as we think. Quit your whining, Kira said, folding her arms. We adapt. We survive. It's what humans do best. Brevin chuckled. Ah, yes, the glorious human spirit, muddling through and hopefully not getting incinerated. Finn turned back to his terminal, fingers flying as he tweaked their digital fingerprints, trying to stay one step ahead of their alien overlords. I can keep them off our scent for now, but we need to be ready to move if things go south. Define if, Todd quipped, because I'm getting the distinct impression when is more accurate. The monitors continued to display a ballet of chaos, data streams swirling in a digital tempest. The Valtari's once flawless system was now a battlefield of glitches and anomalies, each one a tiny victory in their lopsided war. All right, Kira said, her voice cutting through the tension. We need to stay on top of this. Everyone, eyes on the screens, call out anything that looks interesting or deadly. Lena settled into a chair, eyes scanning the monitors with laser focus. Brevin leaned over her shoulder, watching as she navigated the labyrinth of code. Any chance they'll just up and leave, deciding we're too much of a headache to bother with? He asked, half joking. Not likely, Lena replied, smirking. They've invested too much in this planet to let a few troublesome humans ruin their party. Finn's voice piped up from across the room. Hey, maybe we can convince them there's better real estate in the next galaxy over. And how do you propose we do that, genius? Todd asked. Finn grinned. A bit of smoke and mirrors. Might not fool them for long, but it'll buy us some time. Brevin shook his head. We're a ragtag band of rebels, not intergalactic con artists. Details, details, Finn said with a shrug. Sometimes, winging it is all you've got. Hours slipped by in a blur of frantic activity, each glitch in the Valtari network another reminder of the hornet's nest they'd kicked. The longer they stayed under the radar, the more optimistic their plan seemed. Or maybe it was just the sleep deprivation talking. Between caffeine refills and sarcastic quips, Brevin couldn't help but feel a begrudging respect for the strangers-turned comrades who surrounded him. They were far from perfect. Hell, they were about as perfect as a busted relay station, but they had grit, and that was worth its weight in precious metals. So what's the verdict? Brevin asked, breaking the monotonous hum of machines with his voice. Are we genius saboteurs or just lucky fools? Both probably, Lena said, her eyes never leaving the screen. But I'll take it. Kira stood at the center of the room, arms crossed like a general surveying a battlefield. All right, folks. We've gotten ourselves a head start, but it won't last. Let's make the most of it. The room buzzed with activity as they continued to prod the Valtari's network, each keystroke a tiny proclamation of defiance. But with every minute that passed, the specter of retaliation loomed larger, a reminder that their little insurgency was a ticking time bomb. Every now and then, Brevin would glance over at Todd, searching for signs of the skepticism that had colored his friend's every word. But Todd seemed lost in his own thoughts, a contemplative frown etched onto his face. What's on your mind? Brevin asked, nudging him with an elbow. Todd sighed, staring off into the middle distance. Just wondering how long we can keep this up before they wise up and send us packing. Ever the optimist, Brevin replied with a wry smile. Hey, somebody's got to keep us grounded, Todd said, shrugging. Finn's voice cut through the banter. I think we might have a problem. The air in the room shifted, tension coiling like a spring. Kira turned to face Finn, her expression hardening. Define problem. Finn tapped a few keys and the monitors flared to life, displaying a series of ominous alerts. Looks like they're tightening the net. We've got incoming drones, lots of them. Fantastic, Brevin muttered. I was just saying how much I missed playing hide and seek with those metal bastards. Time to move, Kira ordered, her voice sharp as a blade. The group sprang into action, grabbing their gear and preparing to disappear into Axion City's underbelly once more. It was a well-practiced dance, their movements honed by desperation and necessity. As they filed out of the command center, Brevin cast one last glance at the chaos they'd wrought on the Valtari systems. It was a small victory, a flicker of hope in a galaxy gone dark. But in that moment, it felt like an ember worth nurturing. They slipped into the murky corridors of the underbelly, their footsteps echoing like distant thunder. Brevin couldn't help but feel a certain camaraderie in their mad dash for survival, a motley crew thrown together by circumstance, defying the odds with every step. Finn led the way, navigating the labyrinthine tunnels with the ease of someone who had long since memorized their paths. "We'll head to the backup site," he said, voice low. "Keep an eye out for any surprises." "You mean besides the killer drones on our tail?" Lena quipped, ducking under a low-hanging pipe. "You get used to it," Finn replied with a grin. "Call it occupational hazard." The group wound through the tunnels, guided by the flickering neon that cast eerie shadows on the walls. Axion City's underbelly was a place of secrets and shadows, where the lost and the forgotten found refuge from the prying eyes of the world above. Brevin felt the familiar weight of the implant behind his ear, a reminder of the leash they all wore. It was a stark contrast to the electric thrill of rebellion, a reminder that freedom was both their greatest weapon and their greatest liability. As they ducked into a side tunnel, Todd let out a low chuckle. "You know, if this doesn't work out, we could always start a rogue circus." Brevin snorted. "Sure, and our main act can be juggling flaming drones." "Hey, I'm just saying," Todd continued, "we're getting pretty good at this running for our lives routine." "Practice makes perfect," Finn said, peering around a corner before waving them forward. The backup site was a dimly lit room filled with aging terminals and the faint hum of machinery. It wasn't much, but it was theirs, a sanctuary carved out of the chaos where they could regroup and plan their next move. Kira took her place at the center of the room, her presence commanding attention even in the dim light. "All right, folks, we've bought ourselves some time, but we need to figure out what's next." "More of the same, I reckon," Brevin said, leaning against a terminal. "Keep hitting them where it hurts and hope we live to tell the tale." Optimistic as always, Lena teased, settling into a chair. "That's me," Brevin replied with a wink. "A regular ray of sunshine." "Let's focus," Kira interrupted, her tone brooking no argument. "We've proven we can cause chaos, but we need to be more strategic about it." Finn nodded, tapping his chin thoughtfully. "We need to find a way to make the glitches bigger, more damaging, turn their systems into a liability rather than an asset. While staying one step ahead, I presume," Todd quipped, raising an eyebrow. "Naturally," Finn replied with a grin. "I'm all for living dangerously, but I'd prefer to not get vaporized." "Noted," Kira said, her eyes scanning the room. "All right, let's get to work. We've got a lot of chaos to sow and not a lot of time to do it." The group settled in, the room echoing with the clatter of keys and the hum of machinery. It was a familiar rhythm, the soundtrack of rebellion playing on a loop as they danced on the edge of oblivion. Brevin felt the weight of their task pressing down on him, a mix of fear and exhilaration that had become all too familiar. But as he watched his comrades work, each one a testament to human resilience and defiance, he couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. In a world where everything seemed designed to crush them, they were still standing, still fighting. It was a small victory, but it was theirs, and Brevin was determined to make it count. "To chaos," he whispered, raising an imaginary glass to the darkness. The others echoed the sentiment, their voices a quiet rebellion against the encroaching night. And as they worked, Brevin couldn't shake the feeling that maybe, just maybe, they were onto something bigger than themselves, a spark of defiance that might yet set the stars aflame. Brevin watched with a mix of amusement and exasperation as the group settled into their temporary hideout, a dimly lit room that smelled faintly of burnt circuits and stale adrenaline. The flickering glow of ancient terminals cast shadows that danced across the walls like drunken specters. It was almost homey in a dysfunctional, everything's broken and we might die kind of way. Feels like we're squatting in a scrapyard, Brevin muttered, leaning against a terminal that buzzed with a kind of arthritic wheeze. And here I thought my standards couldn't sink any lower. Just wait until the plumbing backs up, Lena replied with a smirk, eyes glued to her screen. Then you'll really feel like royalty. Todd plopped onto a rickety chair that protested loudly against his weight. You know, I always dreamed of living in a bunker surrounded by malfunctioning tech, really hitting all my childhood dreams here. Brevin chuckled. Got any more hopes and dreams we can crush while we're at it? Only if there's time, Todd said, settling in with the air of someone resigned to his fate. Kira stood at the room center, exuding a calm authority that suggested she might actually know what she was doing. All right, listen up. The Valtari aren't sitting around twiddling their thumbs. They're ramping up their surveillance. We need to stay a step ahead or we'll end up as Wall Daker in their trophy room. Finn, forever the mischief maker, was already at a terminal, fingers dancing across the keys like a pianist on a bender. I've been thinking, he said, not looking up. If they're doubling down on tech, maybe it's time we take a more, shall we say, analog approach. Brevin raised an eyebrow. Analog? You planning on sending them a strongly worded letter? More like giving them a surprise, Finn replied, a devilish grin spreading across his face. They expect us to play by their rules, so let's throw out the rule book. Lena glanced over, curious despite herself. What do you have in mind, Finn? Finn leaned back, savoring the moment. We start feeding them bad data, overwhelm their systems with so much nonsense that they can't tell up from down. Like blasting static into their comms, Brevin asked, catching on. Exactly, Finn replied. We hit them with so many false positives that they're chasing their tails. Kira nodded, considering the plan. It's risky, if they catch on. They won't, Finn interrupted, confidence oozing from every pore. They've got a blind spot for unpredictability. We exploit that. Guess it's time to mess with their heads then, Brevin said, feeling a spark of mischief reignite within him. With the plan taking shape, the team launched into action. The room filled with the rhythmic clatter of keys and hushed murmurs as they worked against the clock. Lena focused on the data streams, her brow furrowed with concentration. Brevin admired her dedication. She could somehow make staring at code look heroic. Let's hope they're as susceptible to chaos as we are, Todd commented, plugging into the network with the enthusiasm of a man about to perform delicate surgery with a chainsaw. Assuming they have a sense of humor, Brevin replied, or maybe they'll just appreciate the novelty. As the minutes ticked by, the plan began to take shape. Lena sent out waves of false readings, each one a siren call beckoning the Valtari to chase ghosts. Brevin couldn't help but feel a twinge of satisfaction at the thought of them scrambling to make sense of the nonsense. Look at us, Brevin mused, a bunch of renegades giving an entire alien overlord the runaround. Who'd have thunk it? Don't get too cocky, Kira warned. We're still the underdogs here. Yeah, but we're scrappy underdogs, Brevin shot back with a grin. The room buzzed with nervous energy as they watched the data flow, each new glitch a testament to their audacity. For all their jokes and jabs, there was an unspoken bond in their shared madness, a sense that they were doing something that mattered, even if it might get them killed. How long until they realize we're toying with them? Todd asked, glancing up from his work. Depends on how stupid they are, Lena replied dryly. Or how smart we are, take your pick. Brevin chuckled. I'll bet on them being stupid any day. Kira, ever the pragmatist, remained focused on the task at hand. All right, folks, let's keep this going until they're tied up in knots. If we can buy ourselves even a few hours, it'll be worth it. The group continued to work in tandem, their efforts a symphony of chaos and cunning. It was a risky game they played, but one they were determined to win, or at least not lose too badly. Eventually, Finn leaned back with a satisfied sigh. All right, I think we've given them enough to chew on. Let's see if they're hungry. As they watched the Valtari's network react to their digital assault, Brevin felt a strange mix of pride and impending doom. It was like watching a fireworks display in the middle of a minefield, beautiful, dangerous, and undeniably exhilarating. Here's to making life difficult for our friends upstairs, Brevin said, raising an imaginary toast. May they choke on it, Lena added, her smile a wicked slash in the dim light. The night stretched on, filled with quiet determination and the ever-present hum of technology. Brevin couldn't shake the feeling that they were dancing on a knife's edge, one misstep away from disaster, but he found solace in the knowledge that for now at least they were still in the game. "So what's next?" Todd asked, his voice tinged with both curiosity and exhaustion. Kira considered for a moment before replying. "We keep moving, stay unpredictable, adapt to whatever they throw at us." Brevin nodded. "Sounds like a plan. Let's just hope our luck holds out." As the group settled into a rhythm, Brevin allowed himself a moment of reflection. It was bizarre, really, how their lives had become a constant cycle of chaos and survival. Yet amidst the turmoil, there was a camaraderie, a sense of belonging he hadn't realized he craved. "Here's to being a thorn in the side of the universe," Brevin murmured, his words lost to the hum of activity around him. In a galaxy where everything seemed designed to grind them down, they were still standing, still fighting. And as long as they were still in the fight, there was a chance, a slim, reckless chance that they might just pull it off. As the hours slipped by, Brevin found himself more determined than ever. They were a ragtag band of rebels, outmatched and outgunned. But they were also human, with all the stubbornness and unpredictability that entailed. And that, Brevin mused, might just be their greatest weapon. "Any predictions on how long before they catch on?" Lena asked, breaking the silence. Brevin shrugged. "Hard to say. We've got them tangled up for now, but who knows how long that'll last. Let's just hope they're as slow on the uptake as we are fast on our feet," Finn interjected with a wink. Brevin smiled, feeling a flicker of optimism amidst the chaos. "Well, here's to making their lives as miserable as they've made ours." With their spirits bolstered by their small victory, the group continued their work, fueled by caffeine, adrenaline, and a shared sense of purpose. Brevin couldn't help but feel that despite the odds, they were on the right path, a path that might just lead them to something bigger than themselves. For now, they would keep the game going, their every move a challenge to the Valtari's control. In a world defined by surveillance and control, they would be the wild cards, the unpredictable elements that refused to be contained. As the night wore on, Brevin cast a glance around the room at his companions, each engaged in their own battle against the odds. It was a ragged, chaotic scene, and yet in its own way it was perfect, a testament to their resilience and ingenuity. "Well," Brevin said with a wry grin, "if nothing else, we're giving them a hell of a headache." "And that," Kira replied, her eyes gleaming with resolve, "is something to be proud of." With that, they returned to their work, a sense of purpose driving them forward. It was a tumultuous, uncertain existence, but it was theirs, a life defined by defiance and the refusal to give in. In a galaxy where everything seemed designed to crush them, Brevin and his comrades stood firm, united in their determination to fight back. They were a ragtag band of rebels determined to make their mark on the universe. And as long as they were still in the fight, Brevin knew they had a chance, a slim, reckless chance that they might just change the course of their own destinies. To chaos, Brevin whispered again, raising his imaginary glass to the darkness. And this time, the darkness seemed to raise its glass in return, acknowledging their defiance with a silent toast of its own. The first sign that the evening had taken a more sinister turn was the sudden cessation of Finn's chirpy whistling, a sound that usually marked his state of gleeful mischief. Brevin looked up from his terminal, catching the worried furrow in Finn's brow. "What's got your knickers in a twist?" Brevin asked, trying to keep his tone light despite the knot forming in his own gut. "It's gone quiet," Finn murmured, his fingers paused mid-gesture over the keys. "Too damn quiet, like the calm before Kira finds out you've touched her stuff." Brevin felt a shiver race down his spine. In a city where silence was a myth, it spelt trouble. He threw a glance at Kira, who was standing like a general surveying her troops, her eyes narrowing. The door exploded inward like the universe had just decided to stop playing nice. Debris danced in the air, and Brevin's ears were filled with a shrill ringing that threatened to split his skull. As the dust settled, the room became a scene of organized chaos, if one squinted hard enough and squashed organized and chaos into a blender. "Valtari," Lena spat, her voice dripping with the kind of contempt usually reserved for unsolicited calls from interstellar telemarketers. Brevin's mind raced. The Valtari, ever the uninvited guests, had found their hideout. He felt the weight of their situation like an anchor tied to his ankle, dragging him deeper into a swirling vortex of dread. "Scatter!" Kira barked, all business, even as the walls seemed to close in around them. The group moved like marionettes with broken strings, each veering to a different corner, clutching their meager belongings as they fled into the labyrinthine corridors of Axion City's underbelly. Brevin's breath came in ragged gasps, each step a reminder of the precariousness of their existence. The Valtari were relentless, their drones buzzing overhead like metal mosquitoes with an overblown sense of self-importance. Brevin could almost hear them, mechanical voices whispering sweet nothings about compliance and efficiency. "Looks like we've hit the big time," Finn panted, somehow finding the breath to crack a smile through his panic. "They sent the A-team, more like the B-movie villains," Brevin replied, his voice trying for humor but landing somewhere closer to hysteria. As they dodged through the maze of flickering neon signs and questionable structural integrity, the group began to splinter. Brevin found himself ducking into a shadowed alcove, the sounds of pursuit growing fainter but no less ominous. "Why do they always have to make such a grand entrance?" Lena muttered from the shadows beside him, her presence a comforting reminder that they hadn't all been swallowed by the city. Brevin shrugged, trying to match her bravado. Must be compensating for something. Insecurity issues, probably. But beneath the sarcasm, Brevin felt the churning certainty that they were well and truly screwed. The Valtari were like a bad rash, persistent and impossible to shake. And now, with the group scattered, their chances felt slimmer than Finn's excuses when caught in a lie. A noise from the street jerked Brevin's attention back, and he peered around the corner, his heart doing the cha-cha in his chest. A Valtari drone hovered nearby, its red eye scanning the area with unsettling precision. Brevin held his breath, a childhood game of hide and seek on an interstellar scale, but instead of shouting, "Found you," the drone would likely just reduce him to a smoldering heap of regrets. It hovered for a moment longer, then sped off, apparently deciding that Brevin wasn't worth its time. He let out a shaky breath, heart pounding in his throat. "That was close," Lena whispered, her voice a bomb against the encroaching panic. "Too close," Brevin agreed, the adrenaline leaving a bitter taste in his mouth. Silence stretched between them, the kind pregnant with unspoken fears and the creeping realization that their little game had just upped the stakes. "Think the others made it?" Lena asked, her voice low. "Finn's more slippery than a greased eel," Brevin replied, the corners of his mouth twitching despite himself. "And Kira's got enough survival instincts to keep a whole zoo alive." Lena nodded, though the tension in her shoulders didn't ease. "We need a new plan." Brevin grimaced, raking a hand through his hair. "Yeah, because the last one worked out so well." "Hey, we've still got our charm and devilish good looks," Lena shot back, managing a weak smile. "And a penchant for defying death," Brevin added, though the words tasted hollow. Together they crept through the deserted alleys, their footfalls muted by years of accumulated grime and despair. Brevin felt the weight of each step, the pressure of their predicament pressing down with relentless force. They ducked into a narrow side street, hoping to avoid the prying eyes of any remaining drones. The neon lights cast garish patterns on the walls, mocking their attempts at stealth. "Where do you think they took the others?" Lena asked, her voice laced with concern. Brevin hesitated, the answer sitting heavily on his tongue. "Somewhere unpleasant, I'd wager. The Valtari aren't known for their hospitality." Lena's expression darkened, a reflection of his own thoughts. "We need to get them back." Brevin nodded, though doubt gnawed at the edges of his resolve. "Yeah, but first, we need to regroup. Come up with a plan that doesn't involve us getting turned into wall art." As they moved deeper into the city's underbelly, Brevin couldn't shake the feeling that they were running out of options and time. The Valtari were closing in, and their chances of outsmarting them were dwindling with each passing moment. They slipped into a derelict building, the floor littered with the detritus of a million forgotten lives. It was a temporary haven, the kind of place that offered shelter but little comfort. "At least it doesn't smell as bad as the last one," Lena remarked, wrinkling her nose. Brevin snorted. Small mercies, right? Now we just need a miracle or two. Lena gave him a sideways look, her skepticism clear. You think we've got any left? Brevin shrugged, his bravado faltering. I've learned not to underestimate human stubbornness or stupidity. Sometimes they look the same. A creak of metal drew their attention and Brevin tensed, ready for another round of hide-and-seek with the drones, but it was just the wind teasing their frayed nerves. Where's that plan Kira was always going on about? Lena asked, her voice strained. Brevin shook his head, the weight of leadership settling uncomfortably on his shoulders. Guess it's up to us to come up with one. He glanced around the room, searching for inspiration among the remnants of the past. But all he saw were faded memories and broken promises, a stark reminder of the path they'd chosen. Do you ever wonder if it's worth it? Lena asked, her voice soft in the gloom. Brevin paused, the question settling like dust in the air. Every damn day. But then I remember that the alternative is letting those metal bastards win. Lena nodded, a fierce determination igniting in her eyes. Then let's make sure they don't. Brevin managed a smile, though it felt more like a grimace. Yeah, time to show them what humans are made of, mostly caffeine and poor decisions, but it'll have to do. Together, they began to formulate a plan, each idea more reckless than the last. But as they plotted their next move, Brevin couldn't shake the feeling that they were fighting a losing battle, one that might cost them everything. Yet amid the desolation and despair, there was still a flicker of hope, a stubborn refusal to surrender that echoed in the spaces between their words. And as they prepared to face whatever the universe threw at them next, Brevin knew that they were far from finished. They were a ragtag group of rebels, defying the odds with every breath. In a galaxy that sought to crush their spirits, they would stand tall, united in their defiance. And though the path ahead was fraught with danger and uncertainty, they would face it together, armed with nothing but their wits and an unyielding determination to survive. As the dawn began to break, casting shadows over the city like a cloak, Brevin and Lena set out, their resolve unshaken. They were outmatched and outgunned, but they were human, and that, Brevin mused, might just be their greatest weapon. Brevin sat in the makeshift hideout, his fingers drumming on one of the ancient terminals that had seen better days, probably around the time the galaxy still had a little optimism left. Across from him, Lena surveyed the room with a critical eye, as if she could intimidate the dust into organizing itself. So, got any bright ideas? Lena asked, her voice dripping with a level of sarcasm usually reserved for cheap knockoffs of fancy tech. Brevin leaned back, letting out a sigh that could have rivaled a deflating hovercar. Well, bright might be a stretch, but I've got an idea. Lena raised an eyebrow, the universal sign for skepticism. Oh, this should be good. Brevin leaned forward, lowering his voice conspiratorially, even though the only things around to overhear were a few bored cockroaches. The Valtari don't handle human stupidity well. Lena snorted. Join the club. No, seriously, Brevin insisted. They're all about logic and efficiency. Throw something irrational at them, and they short-circuit like a cheap toaster. Ah, because their metaphorical toast always lands butter side down. Lena quipped, a smirk tugging at her lips. Exactly, Brevin said, leaning back again. We need to make them think we're a bunch of idiots. Well, that should be easy for Finn, Lena replied, her grin widening. Brevin laughed, the sound echoing off the cold walls. True, but this time it's deliberate. We exploit the chaos. Lena nodded slowly, her expression turning thoughtful. Make them think we're too dumb to be a threat, then hit them when they least expect it. Precisely, Brevin agreed, rubbing his hands together. We use their rigidity against them. Throw the rulebook out the airlock. Lena chuckled, shaking her head. I knew there was a reason I didn't strangle you in your sleep. Brevin winked. My charming personality wins again. As they fleshed out the details of their plan, the excitement in the room was almost palpable. It wasn't much, but it was something, an ember of hope in a universe that seemed hell-bent on snuffing it out. All right, Lena said, standing and stretching. Let's gather the others. Time to sell them on our little scheme. Brevin rose and followed her lead, feeling the familiar buzz of adrenaline starting to build. It was a long shot, but they'd thrived on long shots. In a galaxy run by cold logic and metallic overlords, Maybe a little human unpredictability was exactly what they needed. Back in the depths of Axion City's underbelly, the group reconvened, each looking more bedraggled than the last. Finn, sporting a new bruise and a grin that suggested it had been worth it, plopped down on a crate with the air of a man who just won the lottery, if the prize was a kick in the pants. "Nice to see you still breathing," Brevin remarked, noting the bruise. "Ah, you know me," Finn replied, waving a hand dismissively. "I just told the Valtari I found their drones charmingly inefficient." Lena smirked. "And they didn't smite you where you stood." Finn shrugged. "Guess they've got a sense of humor after all. Or they're keeping you around for comic relief," Kira interjected, her voice as dry as a Martian sandstorm. Brevin clapped his hands, drawing attention back to the task at hand. "All right, team, here's the plan." He laid it out, the gleam of mischief in his eyes mirrored by the rest of the group. As he spoke, he could see their expressions shift from doubt to cautious excitement. Maybe, just maybe, they could pull this off. "So, we act like we're a bunch of spacefaring morons," Finn summarized, nodding. "I can definitely do that. And while they're busy trying to make sense of our nonsense, we slip through their defenses," Kira added, leaning back with a satisfied nod. "We'll use the city to our advantage," Brevin said, gesturing around them. "Its maze-like structure is perfect for confusion." Todd, who'd been silent through most of the discussion, finally spoke up, his voice tinged with resignation. "And if it doesn't work?" Brevin shrugged, trying to project an air of confidence he didn't entirely feel. "Then we'll have a good laugh in the afterlife. Or wherever it is we end up," Lena added, her tone light despite the grim implication. Finn chuckled, clapping Brevin on the back. "Well, I always did want to go out with a bang." Brevin grinned, though a part of him couldn't shake the feeling of impending doom. "Let's try to keep the explosions metaphorical, at least until we're clear of the drones." With the plan set, they dispersed into the city, each armed with a task and a healthy dose of skepticism. But beneath the surface, there was a shared determination to see it through, because what other choice did they have? Brevin's part of the plan was simple: cause chaos. He took to the streets like a man with a mission, leaving the hideout with Lena close behind. The city teemed with life, a million stories playing out in the shadows of the towering structures that loomed above. "Ready?" he asked Lena, his voice barely audible over the hum of the city. Lena nodded, her expression a mix of resolve and amusement. "Let's give them a show." They began their impromptu performance, Brevin stumbling over his own feet as Lena berated him loudly enough for the entire block to hear. It was all part of the act, a deliberate display of incompetence designed to draw the attention of any Valtari monitoring the area. "Can't you do anything right?" Lena shouted, hands on her hips like an overworked manager. Brevin scratched his head, playing the fool with a flair that would have made any drama teacher proud. "I dunno, I just pressed the button like you said." "Not that button, you idiot," Lena huffed, throwing her hands up in mock exasperation. Nearby, a Valtari drone hovered, its sensors trained on the scene below. Brevin could almost imagine it trying to process the absurdity unfolding before it, algorithms churning in vain. As the drone moved closer, Brevin made a show of accidentally dropping a small device that emitted a burst of static, the signal designed to scramble the drone's sensors for a few precious moments. Lena glared at him, eyes flashing with the kind of frustration that could only be born of a partnership forged in desperation, and hopefully, soon-to-be success. In the confusion, they slipped away, darting into an alley lined with blinking neon signs. Brevin could hear the drone buzzing behind them, struggling to recalibrate in time. "Think it worked?" Lena asked as they paused to catch their breath. Brevin grinned, the rush of adrenaline making him feel more alive than he had in days. "If it didn't, at least we gave them something to think about." "Or think around," Lena noted dryly. Together, they navigated the labyrinthine streets, each turn calculated to keep them one step ahead of their mechanical pursuers. It was a delicate dance, one that relied on instinct and sheer nerve. The Valtari prided themselves on their order and logic, but Brevin and his crew were determined to show them the power of unpredictability, the kind that only humans could truly master. Elsewhere, Finn and Todd were executing their own brand of chaos, their approach more direct than Brevon's. Finn, never one to shy away from the spotlight, had somehow acquired a megaphone and was currently using it to recite poetry of questionable quality to a crowd of bemused onlookers. "What's he doing now?" Todd asked, peering around the corner. Sounding like an idiot, Finn replied cheerfully, lowering the megaphone as a drone approached. Todd shook his head, a reluctant smile tugging at his lips. "And here I thought you'd never perform in public." Finn winked. "Desperate times, my friend." The drone hesitated, its sensors flickering uncertainly as Finn continued his monologue, the words blending into a cacophony of nonsense that defied understanding. It lingered for a moment, then drifted away, perhaps deciding that the scene unfolding below was beneath its notice. "See, they can't handle creativity," Finn said, his tone triumphant. "Or stupidity. Not sure which," Todd replied, though he couldn't hide his amusement. "You'd be surprised how often they overlap," Finn quipped, tossing the megaphone aside and motioning for Todd to follow. They moved deeper into the city, each step a reminder of the precarious balance they maintained. But as they went, Finn couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. Perhaps they weren't as outmatched as they'd feared. The Valtari might have the numbers, but they had something far more valuable: ingenuity. And if there was one thing humans excelled at, it was finding creative solutions to impossible problems. Back at the hideout, Kira monitored the frequencies, her eyes scanning the screens with the intensity of a hawk spotting its prey. The signals were chaotic, just as they'd hoped, the Valtari's communications a tangle of confusion and misdirection. She allowed herself a small smile, the first in what felt like an eternity. Brevon's plan was working, and with any luck, it would buy them the time they needed to regroup and strike back. But she knew better than to count her victories too soon. The Valtari might struggle with unpredictability, but they were nothing if not persistent. "How's it looking?" Lena asked as she and Brevon returned, their faces flushed with exertion. Kira gestured to the screens, the chaotic data a testament to their success. "They're scrambling, like ants at a picnic." Brevon nodded, satisfaction in his eyes. "Good, let's keep the pressure on." They gathered around the table, the air thick with anticipation. It was a long shot, but it was their best shot, and in a universe that seemed determined to grind them down, that was enough. "We're not out of the woods yet," Kira warned, her voice a reminder of the reality they faced. Brevon nodded, his expression sobering. "But we're in the fight, and that's something." Together, they mapped out their next move, each contribution a piece of the puzzle they hoped would lead to their survival. It was a gamble, but one they were willing to take. In a galaxy ruled by cold logic and ruthless efficiency, they were the wild card, the unpredictable element that refused to be counted out. And as they prepared to make their next move, Brevon couldn't help but feel a spark of hope. They might be outnumbered and outgunned, but they were human, and that made them dangerous. Because in the end, it wasn't technology or numbers that defined a species. It was heart, and Brevon would be damned if he let the Valtari forget it. Brevon tightened the straps on his patchwork armor, glancing around the dimly lit room with a smirk that could have melted the circuits of any Valtari drone. They'd been planning this rebellion for what felt like eons, though the reality was probably closer to a few weeks. Time was funny like that, especially when you were betting your life on a plan that involved being as stupidly unpredictable as possible. "All right," he announced, looking at the ragged crew gathered before him. "Today we make history, or at least we make the Valtari reconsider their life choices." Lena leaned against a terminal, arms crossed and an eyebrow arched. "You mean their programming choices?" Details, Brevon waved her off. "The point is, we're throwing logic out the airlock." Todd, who was still trying to convince himself that sitting in on this rebellion was better than sitting in a Valtari prison cell, sighed. "By being idiots." "That's right." Finn grinned, the kind of grin that usually preceded his worst ideas. "And if there's one thing we know, it's how to be convincingly dumb." Kira was busy at her post, surrounded by a mess of wires and screens that made the command center look like an electronic junkyard that had been hit by a tornado. She glanced up, looking far too pleased with herself. "Systems are set. Every error we introduce is going to spread through their network like a bad case of space lice." "Great," Brevon nodded. I always wanted to be a pest. You've already got that part down, Lena quipped, earning a chuckle from Finn. Brevin spread out a crudely drawn map of Axion City's underbelly. So, here's the plan. We hit them where it hurts their pride and their processors. And how do we do that? Todd asked, skepticism dripping from his words. Brevin's grin widened. By acting like the most incompetent bunch of rebels they've ever seen. We're going to bungle our way through their defenses, and they'll never see the logic in it because there is no logic. This is either going to be brilliant or the most spectacular failure we've ever attempted, Lena said, shaking her head. We'll go down in history either way, Finn shrugged. Might as well aim for spectacular. They dispersed into the city, each carrying a piece of the plan that was as crucial as it was ridiculous. The silence of Axion City was unnerving, a constant reminder that the Valtari were watching, waiting for the moment to swoop in and restore order. But Brevin and his crew were counting on their surveillance. They wanted the Valtari to see everything, because what they'd see wouldn't make any sense. Brevin led Lena through the winding streets, his mind racing with the possibilities. The Valtari had never faced anything quite like this before, and he aimed to make sure they'd never forget it. Ready to make an impression? He asked as they approached their target, a towering structure bristling with antennas and other vital-looking bits that Brevin was sure would make a satisfying mess if tampered with. Lena snorted. If by impression you mean leaving them as confused as a worm at a space opera, then yes. Together, they set to work, Brevin pulling wires with the enthusiasm of a child disassembling a toy, while Lena provided the right mix of encouragement and disbelief. You know how much this is going to cost to fix, right? Lena said, watching as sparks flew. Cost. Brevin laughed, yanking another cable. They can bill me in the afterlife. Just as they'd planned, the system began to sputter, sending a cascade of errors through the network. Brevin could almost picture the Valtari technicians watching their screens, scratching their metallic heads in confusion. That ought to keep them busy, he said, wiping his hands on his pants. Let's give them some more to think about. Across the city, Finn and Todd were executing their part of the plan with the kind of flair that suggested they had a future in improv. Should they survive the day, Finn was busy making a nuisance of himself, running in circles around a particularly persistent drone, shouting nonsensical commands into a comm unit that wasn't connected to anything but his own manic energy. Left, no, right, spin, do the hokey pokey, he barked, waving his arms like a conductor at a concert for the insane. Todd watched from a safe distance, shaking his head. You're going to get yourself shot, you know that. Hey, I'm a moving target, Finn replied, dodging a low-flying drone with a nimbleness that suggested he'd done this before. Besides, Valtari aim is as bad as their humor. That's not saying much, Todd countered, but there was a spark of admiration in his eyes as he watched Finn lead the drones on a merry chase. Their antics were designed to overload the drone network, each erratic movement a calculated attempt to jam their systems with illogical data. It was working, Finn noted with satisfaction as the drones began to lag, their reactions slower and more fragmented. Looks like they're having a bad day, Finn said with a grin, retreating into the shadows with Todd in tow. Just hope they don't take it out on us, Todd muttered, though his steps were lighter than they'd been in weeks. Meanwhile, Kira was orchestrating chaos from her command center, her fingers flying over the controls with the precision of a seasoned pilot navigating an asteroid field. Every key press was an invitation for the Valtari to lose themselves in a mire of human-induced errors. Okay, she muttered, eyes flicking across the screens like a hawk tracking prey. Let's see how you handle this one. She initiated a sequence that sent nonsensical commands through the Valtari network, each one designed to contradict the last. It was a symphony of chaos, and the Valtari were forced to dance to the tune or risk their systems crashing entirely. How's it going? Brevin asked, slipping into the room with Lena. Kira didn't look up, her attention fixed on the screens, like watching a cat chase its tail. Good, Brevin said, nodding approvingly. Keep it up. The more tangled they get, the better. Lena peered over Kira's shoulder, watching as the Valtari systems flickered and blinked, struggling to cope with the onslaught of errors. Looks like they're going to have a meltdown. That's the idea, Kira replied, a rare note of satisfaction in her voice. "If we can overload their systems, they'll have no choice but to pull back." Brevin grinned. "And then we'll have the upper hand, at least for a little while." Back on the streets, Finn and Todd were leading the drones on a merry chase through the heart of the city, their impromptu performance drawing curious stares from the few brave enough to venture out in the silence. "Think we're getting through to them?" Todd asked, ducking behind a corner as a drone zipped past. "Definitely making an impression," Finn replied, his voice breathless but triumphant. "They're not used to improvising." "That makes two of us," Todd muttered, though he couldn't help but smile at Finn's enthusiasm. Their antics were paying off, the drones' movements becoming increasingly erratic as they struggled to process the chaos around them. Finn could almost hear the system grinding under the weight of its own complexity. "Ready for the finale?" he asked, glancing at Todd. Todd nodded, though there was a hint of resignation in his eyes. Might as well give them a show to remember. Together, they led the drones in one final sprint through the city, a wild chase that ended with them diving into an alley just as the system reached its breaking point. For a moment, it was as if the whole city held its breath, the silence more profound than it had ever been. Then with a flicker and a pop, the drones sputtered to a halt, their circuits fried by the sheer unpredictability of human ingenuity. "We did it," Finn said, his voice barely a whisper as he stared at the fallen drones. Todd nodded, disbelief warring with relief. "We actually did it." Back at the hideout, Kira watched as the screens went dark, the Valtari systems finally succumbing to the overload. It was a victory, albeit a temporary one, but it was enough for now. "We've got them on the run," she said, her voice carrying a note of triumph that resonated through the room. Brevin allowed himself a moment of satisfaction before turning to his crew. "All right, let's not get cocky. We've bought ourselves some time, but we need to stay on our toes." Lena snorted, "As if we've ever been off them." Brevin chuckled, the tension of the past weeks finally starting to ease. "True enough, but now we've got a chance to regroup, plan our next move." Finn and Todd returned, breathless but victorious, and Brevin clapped them on the back. "Nice work out there. You really gave them a run for their money." "More like a run for their logic," Finn corrected, still grinning like a man who just won the lottery. Brevin shook his head, though he couldn't hide his own smile. "Whatever it was, it worked. Now let's make sure we're ready for whatever they throw at us next." The room buzzed with a new energy, a sense of possibility that had been missing for so long. They'd done the impossible, outwitting a foe that prided itself on being unbeatable. It was a small victory, but in a world where every day was a fight for survival, it was enough to keep them going. And as Brevin looked around at his crew, he felt a flicker of hope. They'd faced the Valtari and won, using nothing more than their wits and a healthy dose of unpredictability. They were the wild card in a game that should have been rigged against them. And as long as they could keep the Valtari off balance, they had a fighting chance. Because in the end, it wasn't just technology or numbers that would decide their fate. It was their spirit, their refusal to be cowed by an enemy that saw them as nothing more than a problem to be solved. And for Brevin and his crew, that was everything. The dim glow from Axion City's skyline flickered in and out like a busted neon sign, a fitting tribute to a world in recovery. The Valtari's iron grip over the city had been pried loose by a group of misfits with too much nerve and too little sense, a combination that, in retrospect, seemed to be humanity's secret weapon all along. Brevin leaned against the balcony railing, overlooking the labyrinth of twisted metal and haphazard construction that the city under new management had become. "Human management. Looks like a trash heap," Finn remarked, joining him with a cup of something that looked and smelled like it had crawled out of a recycler. "Yeah, but it's our trash heap now," Brevin replied, not entirely sure if that was a point of pride or a setup for disappointment. "Fits us, don't you think? Patchwork and a little bit broken, but somehow still standing." Lena sauntered over, her usual sarcasm tempered by a hint of satisfaction. "We've all the charm of a bruised apple. Just the same, people are starting to come out of their hidey holes." "Can't blame them," Finn said. "They've been under the digital boot for so long, they probably forgot what the sky looks like without drones buzzing around like they are the paparazzi of doom." Brevin nodded, his thoughts spinning back to the battle they'd just waged. The Valtari had underestimated them, assuming that humans couldn't outlast a machine's patience. Turns out, human stupidity was more resilient than anyone, especially the Valtari, had accounted for. Who would have thought our greatest weapon would be unpredictability? Brevin mused. I mean, sure, it's mostly because we never agree on anything, but it worked. Lena nudged him with an elbow. And here I thought you had some grand plan. Turns out we were just throwing rocks at a wasp nest and hoping the wasps were allergic. We should throw a party, Finn suggested. Something big and loud enough to wake the dead. Just imagine, a celebration to commemorate how we didn't die. Kira appeared, her usual stoic expression softened by a rare smile. Maybe we should hold off on the fireworks. We're still figuring out if the drones are completely out of commission or just having a long nap. Besides, said Todd, joining the group, we don't want to jinx it. The universe has a sense of irony and I'd rather not tempt it just yet. Right, Brevin agreed. One crisis at a time. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. We've managed to wrest some control, but holding onto it is going to be a whole new game. Finn chugged back the contents of his cup, grimacing. Well, if it's anything like the last round, it'll be like playing cards with half the deck missing and one of us short a finger. Better than playing with the Valtari's deck, Lena quipped. Their idea of fun is a spreadsheet. Brevin smiled grimly. At least our brand of chaos keeps things interesting. The city was stirring beneath them, people cautiously stepping back into the open, testing the air for the scent of freedom, and possibly something burning, which was pretty standard here. The Valtari's absence was like a hole in the sky, an uncomfortable emptiness that everyone was eager to fill with new beginnings or, at the very least, harmless mischief. Brevin turned to the group, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. He wasn't just a rebel leader anymore. Now he was something else, something that carried a hell of a lot more paperwork. We've got a chance to rebuild, to make this place our own, but it's not going to be easy. Never is, Kira said, adjusting her ever-present toolkit. But at least we've got a shot, and if anyone knows how to make the most out of slim chances, it's us. Todd scratched his head. I still can't wrap my head around the fact that we actually did it, that we outsmarted the Valtari. More like outdumbed them, Lena corrected. Remember, their biggest weakness is that they never saw the brilliance in our stupidity. True, Brevin acknowledged. They never could figure out why anyone would try to beat the unbeatable. But that's the thing about humans, we're stubborn. Too dumb to quit, too clever to stay down. And now we're running Action City, Finn said, gesturing grandly. From a bunch of clanking overlords to us. The universe must be having a laugh. Let it laugh, Brevin said, determination in his voice. We'll just laugh louder. The sound of tentative music drifted up from the streets below, a hesitant melody of someone testing an old guitar. It was a sound not heard in Action City for a long time, music that wasn't part of the Valtari's constant surveillance soundtrack. It was imperfect, human, and beautiful. Hey, Lena said, nodding toward the noise. Looks like someone's starting the party without us. Finn grinned. Guess it can't hurt to join in. Brevin looked at his crew, a ragtag group who had somehow become family, and nodded. Yeah, let's go see what kind of mess we've gotten ourselves into this time. As they made their way down to the street, Brevin felt a strange mix of hope and apprehension. The Valtari might have been defeated, but the real challenge was just beginning. They had a city to run, a society to rebuild from the scraps left behind by their former masters. But for now, the dark humor that had carried them this far was still burning bright. They'd faced the worst and had come out alive, ready to face whatever came next with the same reckless courage that had seen them through the chaos. Ever think we'd be standing here? Finn asked as they reached the street where a small crowd was gathering around the makeshift music. Brevin shrugged. Nope, but I'm glad we are. Todd laughed. Let's hope we can keep this going without accidentally blowing everything up. Lena snorted. Where's the fun in playing it safe? Kira smirked. Exactly. If things get too quiet, we might have to stir up some trouble just to keep ourselves entertained. Brevin shook his head, a smile on his face. Trouble? Us? Never. And with that, they joined the growing crowd, letting the music, the laughter, and the energy of a city reborn wash over them. They'd won the battle, and now it was time to win the peace. with as much irreverence and absurdity as they could muster. After all, they were human, and that meant they were unpredictable to a fault. In the end, it wasn't just the Valtari that had underestimated them. The universe itself had underestimated the tenacity of a species that thrived on chaos and adversity, a species that refused to be boxed in by logic or reason. Brevin and his crew had learned one undeniable truth: they didn't need to follow the rules to win. They just needed to be themselves, maddeningly inconsistent and irredeemably flawed. As they stood there, not quite leaders, not quite rebels, but something altogether new, Brevin felt a surge of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could build something better out of the ruins. And if not, well, they'd go down swinging, laughing in the face of the universe's absurdity, because that was what humans did best.